So yeah, sorry for that delay. First of all, good afternoon. Thank you all for your attention. We're very honored to be here and to be able to present among such distinguished scholars and presenters and guests that we have here. And as Dr. Paracka mentioned, we're the Model African Union team. And what we are is basically a student organization that tries to simulate the work of the actual African Union. And we do this by researching various issues on the continent of Africa, and we debate these issues through a formal diplomatic parliamentary procedure in conferences, and then we try to create resolutions to address these issues. And what's very interesting and unique and challenging about the way we do this is that we do act as delegates of specific countries and therefore have to stay in character of those countries' policies, their viewpoints, and present those viewpoints only even when they conflict with our own personal viewpoints. So it's good training in diplomacy and also helps us grasp the challenges often that come trying to cooperate on certain issues. So the broad topic that we addressed was colonialism's impact on identities, and we're specifically looking at gender identity and the changing role of women, and also ethnic and racial identities, just briefly. Anyone who's studied Africa and the developing world knows the legacy of colonialism is an extremely important issue, so we just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into this in the case of Morocco. And so we're going to start off with Damie, and she'll start us off with the issue of gender identity and changing role of women.
I would like to start with a quote from a book that in some way expresses the crux of this part of the presentation. Nadia Benjeloum once said that the rebirth of a people must proceed in tandem with the intellectual evaluation of the woman. Just like many nations today, once under colonial rule, the issue of identity became a major issue to Morocco as the ethnic, religious, and in this case, gender identity of the Moroccan society was transformed by the intervention of colonialism. In colonial Morocco, we see gender used as a tool by the colonial leaders to stabilize the Moroccan woman's traditional position and to mark the division between Europeans and the natives, and also to maintain distinctions among Moroccan Arabs, Berbers, and Jews. In the fight for independence, there was a significant shift in the identity of the Moroccan woman. Moroccan nationalist elites, both men and women, began to challenge the classification system used by the colonial leaders and began calling for the unification of an Islamic legal system and for legal and educational reforms that would advance and modernize the status of the Moroccan woman. It is important to note that the public forum for debating gender questions was closed when the French shut down the nationalist press and exiled most of the leadership on the eve of the World War II. However, these questions resumed between 1943 and 1944. With the resumption of these debates, King Mohammed V began to take the lead in using the issues of women's advancements to define Moroccan identity and challenge the legitimizing logics of colonial intervention. Moroccan women were not just used as objects of state and society-based identification struggles in the colonial political field. In fact, they were actively contributing to the discursive struggles over collective identity. They also engaged in practices and activities that expanded their presence in the political atmosphere, and directly and indirectly accommodated and resisted aspects of colonial rule.
Now, regarding gender equality within ethnic groups, the majority of studies on Berbers in Morocco describe them as a patriarchal society, focusing on the role of male power in the social organization. In this regard, in a society marked by a clear division of labor, the man has status in both the social, in both an actor as a production and also the head of the household. This faculty allows him to sit in the Dijima, a tribal council that deliberates on the various issues relating on community life. However, social transformation affecting Berber society have produced a new logic, which defines the man as a source of income, while at the same time limiting women's roles to inside the home. Nevertheless, this should not downplay the role of women in different tribes throughout Morocco, where women have played and are still playing a crucial role in the social organization in their community. For example, women in the Reef Mountains can go out with their faces uncovered and even attend the deliberations of the Jima, where they often take the floor. The central role of women, despite the patriarchal nature of the tribes, was also reported in the High Atlas Mountains, where monogamy is an important role, particularly in the Sektawaa tribes. Regarding gender equality throughout Morocco, the dream of the feminist reform only materialized in 1999 when the government proposed the National Plan of Action for Integrating Women in Development, or the NPA, promising to remove the conditions of gender inequalities from family law. The NPA was the outcome of a year-long teamwork between feminist groups and the newly elected socialist government. It drew heavily upon the United Nations Convention on Women's Rights, notably the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, or CEDAW, and the Beijing Platform for Action of 1995, all the while ignoring the Islamic Sharia as a source of inspiration, which, not surprisingly, this project met with virulent opposition by Islamics and conservatives, polarizing Moroccan society and the women's movement alike, with secular, feminist, supporting the reform, and pro-Sharia Islamics opposing it, driving all these forces to do street demonstrations on March 12, 2000. These new cultural political movements all focus their attention on the rights of politically marginalized populations, the individual within the social world, and the moral values society should follow. Yet, the espoused paths to a higher morality diverge dramatically, whereas the liberal women's organization wanted to emancipate them individual from the constraints of society, while Islamic organizations want to situate the individual firmly within the collectivity. It can be seen how these cultural political movements in Morocco utilize the language of human rights and fulfillment of human capacity. For instance, women organizations cite verses from the Quran in order to build support for incorporating elements of a universalist definition of human rights into law. Conversely, Islamic groups quote verses of the Quran in order to deny the need for universalist concepts and terms. Women's rights in Morocco promotion movements have also seen influence from the international community, but have also been influenced uniquely international policies and groups. The reform of the Personal Status Code of 2004 featured a revised family code with articles pertaining to women's legal rights and capabilities. Promotions of the family code highlight Article 25, which allow women to get married without a wali, who is a family representative, usually the father, assisting women to seek divorces, and helping women with legal representation. However, the highlights did not include Article 236, which declared that the father is a legal representative for children in all cases, even if they do not have custody of them. People are both in favor and against the code, with people noting that without the consent of the wali, the marriage is not valid according to Islamic customs. In response to the pushback from the international community, along with the voices that arose during the Arab uprising in 2011, Morocco's new constitution was framed towards sustainable development and enhancing human rights, but failed to include definitions as to how women were going to be ensured. The human rights protections were in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as several other conventions to which Morocco is party to, such as the previously mentioned Beijing Platform and the Convention of Eliminating Discrimination Against Women. And while Morocco has ratified those conventions, it has reservations regarding certain articles, such as withdrawing from Article 16, which pertains to gender equality within family and marital relations, and Article 9, Subclause 2, as they were deemed incompatible with Islamic law. However, in 2011, King Mohammed VI withdrew these reservations regarding Articles 9 and 16, thus declaring that Morocco will comply with legal obligations to the state made by these conventions unless they conflict with the provisions of the Islamic Sharia. In the end, certain Western, non-Moroccan policies were integrated into the national strategy for development. So gender equality is not something that can be made up in it, or could match up in an instant. However, Morocco is making strong strides in accomplishing it within their standards for their future generations.
So regarding ethnic identities, one way that colonialism impacts identities is that often a strategy used by colonizers to assert their dominance and maintain power was to employ divide and rule tactics, typically allowing them to pit different ethnic groups against each other for strategic purposes. And as you can imagine, this can have profound consequences on the society and ethnic identities, creating divisions that can be hard to mend even in the absence of the colonial power after independence is achieved. In many cases, different ethnic groups were able to coexist peacefully together pre-colonialism, or at the very least, they tolerated each other and minded their own business. Ethnic identities were not as rigidly defined and not as important as an issue often as they would become in times of imperialism before colonialism. I like this quote by an identity scholar, Colin Mercer. He says, "Identity only becomes an issue when it is in crisis, when something assumed to be fixed, coherent, and stable is displaced by the experience of doubt and uncertainty." Identity started becoming more important and more of a question when it was threatened by colonialism. I think this can be applied to the case of the Moroccan Arab and the Amazigh or Berber identities, as they weren't really called into question until colonialism impacted them. So French colonialism in Morocco definitely employed the divide and rule strategy and was trying to divide the Arab urban and the Amazigh rural populations. The French mistakenly believed that a Mahsen Siba, or Arab-Berber dichotomy in Moroccan society created animosity between the two groups, but this was not true as they were coexisting peacefully. And in order to diminish the power of the Sultan, Arab influence, and Islamic influence, France enacted a strategy that they believed would make this dichotomy even more pronounced. They enacted a set of legal reforms known as the Berber Dahir of 1930, which established a separate customary legal system for the Berber and removed them from Sharia jurisdiction. The French believed this would not only divide the groups, but also prop up the Berber, which they had interest in doing because the Berber did pose a military resistance threat. The plan completely backfired because, as I said, it was a mistake thinking that there was such a strong dichotomy and that they weren't coexisting peacefully. And also, it was a crucial mistake that they attacked the existing Islamic code, the Sharia, and the Arabs could not tolerate this. And what this did was fuel feelings of nationalism and mark the beginning of a sort of Arab-led Moroccan nationalist movement. So colonialism's initial impact was actually, in a sense, to unify the Arab and Berber identities, pushing for solidarity and establishing a national Moroccan identity. However, it's not as easy as that. There were definitely complexities to this. So though the nationalist movement was pushing for a Moroccan identity rather than separate identities, because of the nature of the French strategy in trying to elevate the status of the Berbers and trying to diminish the Arab status, and particularly the religious Islamic piece of this identity, there was a definite push for this Moroccan identity to be an Arab Islamic one. And so after independence, you started to see the Berber identity become more and more marginalized. And as time went on, of course, the response was to develop a movement to revitalize the Berber identity. So though colonialism did not lead to outright ethnic conflict or strong tensions in Morocco, as it often does, it certainly changed the complexities of the Arab-Berber identities and relationship, and it would shape how these groups define and strengthen their identities moving forward. So regarding racial identity, I've focused on Black Africans in Morocco, which this identity was, of course, primarily shaped by the institution of slavery. And the Black African population grew as a result of the trans-Saharan slave trade. Slavery was accepted by Islamic law and was actually an integral part of Moroccan society from the 18th century. The status of black Africans being primarily slaves meant that they were a marginalized population that faced significant discrimination and did not enjoy the rights and privileges that other Moroccans had. It did not really enjoy any rights and privileges at all. And colonialism's impact on this institution, and therefore black identity, emerges during the Enlightenment period when there was a push to abolish slavery. And the colonial powers actually used this movement as a piece in justifying their agenda, colonial agenda, justifying their conquest and fueling the rhetoric of the need to civilize Africa. Despite this rhetoric, to no surprise, when the Moroccan Protectorate was established, while the slave trade was indeed legally abolished internationally, the institution of slavery itself was not. And despite the international ban on the slave trade, slave markets still existed, and the colonial powers often turned a blind eye. What did, however, finally gradually lead to the fall of slavery was the imposition of capitalism by the French. So the social fabric in Morocco was transformed by capitalism as a wage earning system was introduced. This system ended up contributing to the marginalization of blacks in a different way, promoting urbanization and mass migration to big cities, which contributed to the creation of slums and black African status as poor. And colonialism additionally served to entrench racism deeper as they brought their own ideas of black inferiority, reinforcing existing prejudices and discrimination. So that was broad, but a little bit on colonialism's impact on different types of identities, and we thank you for your attention.